With both Elias Lindholm and Sean Monahan both being dealt, the center position coming into the trade deadline is looking pretty thin. But the Buffalo Sabres have just recently put big-time player and former 8th overall pick Casey Mittelstadt on the trade block. We got a lot of news recently about Mittelstadt and his contract troubles with the Buffalo Sabres and why the Sabres are looking to move him, as well as what it could cost to get Mittelstadt in the end, and it's gonna be quite a bit. But make sure you guys watch till the end as we go through all the trade rumors and all the news surrounding Mittelstadt, and of course, where he could potentially end up. And make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey and trade content just like this as we lead up to the deadline next month. Now, we got a lot to talk about with Casey Mittelstadt, his future in Buffalo, and where he could end up. But first, let's talk about today's sponsor in Sleeper Fantasy. As we talked about before, Sleeper Fantasy is the best way to turn your hockey knowledge into payday by making daily NHL picks. All you guys got to do to win big is to predict more or less on your favorite NHL players each night. And tonight, I got 3 different picks that I thought were pretty interesting. First, I got Jack Hughes higher than 3.5 shots on goal. He's been unreal, 7 shots on goal in his last 2 games, and he's been unreal since he returned from injury. Also, Quinton Byfield higher than 0.5 points. He has been going off. He's getting a point in each of his last 5. I think has really looked solid for LA. And then last but not least, Nick Suzuki, who has been a king recently for the Habs. I think he's going to get a point as well versus Anaheim. He has also been unreal. But make sure you guys don't wait to make your daily NHL picks. Go in the description, click on the link, go to Sleeper Fantasy and sign up and use promo code GRAV on your first deposit, and you get up to a $500 match. Thank you so much to Sleeper Fantasy for sponsoring today's video, and let's get right back into it. Now let's talk about the Casey Mittelstadt trade rumors, and it originated from the After the Whistle podcast. Andrew Peters revealed that he received information from a highly credible source indicating that the Buffalo Sabres general manager Kevin Adams is actively seeking trade options for Casey Mittelstadt. The motivation behind this move, as per Peters, is Adams' reluctance to commit financially to the 25-year-old forward. Now, David Pagnotta, further on this reporting, says that the Sabres aren't actively trying to move him, but multiple teams say Buffalo is listening. Mittelstadt prefers to stay, but he is in play. Now, interestingly, he goes on to say Mittelstadt can become an RFA this July. He has arbitration rights and will command a big ticket. I suspect the Sabres are shopping others on the team, but this could evolve into a big talent for talent swap if a trade comes to fruition. And that would not surprise me. The player we're talking about here is right in the middle of his prime and really starting to cement himself with this Buffalo Sabres team. You can see at 25 years old, these last couple of years, we've really seen him break out into the player that he was drafted to be. 59 points last year in 82 games, 44 assists. And then this year, that playmaking continues to be the star of the show. 42 points, 30 assists in 51 games. He's really been one of the most consistent Buffalo Sabres this year on a team that's had so many forwards really just being a negative, especially compared to last year. Mittelstadt has been a breath of fresh air for them and actually playing like he should. But to me, when I'm watching Mittelstadt, I also kind of appreciate the two-way game that he's starting to develop. It's nothing absolutely spectacular, but he's looking pretty good this year, and especially improving year to year. You've seen that progression in that overall game. On top of the offense being as good as it's ever been. Right now, Mittelstadt could be an excellent second-line center and could be exactly what a lot of teams need right now. Usually, it would be a no-brainer for Buffalo to re-sign Mittelstadt, especially considering they have $25 million freed up in the offseason, but considering how much they've already allocated to some of the younger guys, with Tage Thompson, Dylan Cousins getting massive deals on the forward group, and on the defense as well, Dahlin, you got also Owen Power, you also got Matthias Samuelsson making pretty big money too. Even though they could probably afford to keep him, Buffalo has already given out a lot of major contracts to younger players, and that's something as well that Mittelstadt is keeping tabs on. It would be especially brutal to give him up, especially considering he's like one of only 3 players on the Sabres this season that's like met expectations this year. It's a pretty sad group there, but Mittelstadt has been a bright spot and has looked incredible at that 25-year-old age, and we're starting to see him turn that page again and become the center that he could have been, that he should have been, and is now. And he's going to be a guy that if he does get traded is going to command a lot. He's not also that bad in the faceoff department. He has the most faceoffs on the Sabres and is around 47%. Not ideal, but also not a detriment, especially for a younger player. He's learning in that aspect. Same thing with the defensive game and the overall impact that he's been able to show. It's been kind of sad to see because of just how sorry Buffalo has been this year, but Mittelstadt's value has been incredible. And if he were to be traded at the deadline, I mean, this would be a guy that would instantly make so many contenders better. But the big thing is the price, and Elliotte Friedman recently talked about this situation and said the Buffalo Sabres are actively seeking immediate assistance to enhance their roster and improve their win-loss record. This has been speculation about the team's intentions, with the key takeaway being their emphasis on making impactful improvements immediately. Reported yesterday, Casey Mittelstadt is being shopped by Buffalo. The sense would be that the Sabres aren't just looking for picks and prospects in that trade. So basically saying that if Buffalo were to trade a Casey Mittelstadt, were to make that deal happen, it would be for some type of deal that they would think would make them better. So if you're thinking you're going to get Casey Mittelstadt for a first and a prospect, that's not going to happen. In Buffalo's eyes, it looks like they would have to improve if they were to trade Mittelstadt, which I gotta say, kind of feels like it might be a little bit difficult for them. The problem is, in making Buffalo better, it would have to be a premier defenseman or some goaltender or something that would make that team better overall. Because I think if you're going to trade for a forward that's better than Mittelstadt, I'm not sure how many guys out there would even be an option for them. For Buffalo, there are a couple of pieces that I think would be necessary in a Casey Mittelstadt deal. First, of course, a right D who you could pair alongside a Dahlin or a Power that can bring some responsibility defensively, which they are sorely lacking. As well as likely a bottom sixer, at least somebody on a third line level, I would say, who could really bring a solid punch, some decent defensive ability, and kind of round out that forward group a lot better. To me, that's where the deal starts. Now, David Pagnotta had some further reporting on the Casey Mittelstadt situation, and he mentions one team here that is apparently interested in Mittelstadt's services, saying it is unclear which teams have expressed interest in Mittelstadt, though Peters has suggested the Anaheim Ducks could be one of them. So, potentially Anaheim as a Mittelstadt trade option, which would be pretty wild. Now, I'm not really too sure how much Anaheim really is as a trade option, considering, of course, you already got Carlson and McTavish as centers. And sure, Mittelstadt has been listed as a third-line center a few times here with Buffalo, and it obviously has worked out this season. But I also think giving him third-line center minutes, especially if he were to be dealt, I think would be kind of curious, especially since Anaheim would need to pay him some pretty big bucks. And I just don't really think it's too much of a need for Anaheim at this point to add another young center. That's pretty much the biggest thing they have right now going for. And considering their right D, they're not going to trade Radko Gudas, and Ilya Lyubushkin already has experience with Buffalo. I doubt the Sabres would want to retry that experiment again. Exploring the trade market, though, this was an interesting one that was brought up by Sam Belton of the Hockey News, talking about the Colorado Avalanche as a potential Mittelstadt fit. They end up mentioning Bowen Byram as a potential trade piece, which maybe this could end up happening, but again, Bowen Byram is playing on the left side. He's also not a defensive D by any means. He is a puck-moving transitional D, which Buffalo obviously already has a lot of. The main problem is that for a team trying to trade for Mittelstadt, you would have to give up some pretty big pieces, which I just don't feel like a lot of contenders are going to want to do. You got a Josh Manson, who I think would be amazing for the Buffalo Sabres, but there's no chance in heck the Avs are doing that. Now, I have heard some talk about potentially Montreal being a fit for Mittelstadt, which would be interesting. You'd have a top 3 center core of the future of Suzuki, Doc, and Mittelstadt, which would be pretty awesome. But I do think for Montreal, there maybe could be some options for them to trade. Maybe David Savard is a guy that Buffalo wants. He makes $3.5 million for this year and next, so he wouldn't be a pure rental, which could be something that does entice the Buffalo Sabres. And defensively, I mean, I still don't know if Savard is all of that, but maybe Buffalo thinks otherwise. Also, Jordan Harris, who we talked about as a potential trade option for the Habs as well this year. He's been on the block. We've known he's been on the block. Maybe Buffalo goes after him. But I also see Harris is still more of an offensive puck handling D. And again, I just don't know if that's what Buffalo wants to add. Now, maybe this is where Jake Allen actually ends up going. Of course, him not being a rental either, having multiple years left on his deal, and obviously Buffalo still having quite a bit of cap space. If they want to go after a goaltender, if they do want to add somebody next to Devon Levi, even if Luukkonen has looked better, Jake Allen could maybe be an option. He had that horrible game for St. Louis Shore, but at the same time, maybe Jake Allen is a part of a deal like that. If Buffalo wants to go after a goalie, Jake Allen would probably be one of the better guys available. There was also some people talking about a potential Flyers deal, which I think actually could be interesting. You've also had Morgan Frost as another younger center that's kind of had some trade rumors linked in. With Frost's case, you know, there has been some rumors about him wanting out in Philadelphia. I don't know how much Buffalo will be enticed by a player like that obviously isn't going to be putting in much defensive play. But you also consider what Philadelphia could bring on defense. Maybe if Buffalo's open with maybe having a player re-signed afterwards, maybe they go after a Sean Walker perhaps. There's a couple options on Philly that'll be interesting. I think as a pure fit, Mittelstadt would be incredible with the Flyers as that second line center behind Couturier who could bring in some offense there. I don't know how he would fit with Tortorella, but I'd love to see how that would work. Now, I know you guys are probably sick of me talking about this team and trading for players, but dang it, I'm going to tell you guys right now about a team that I think could really work for Casey Mittelstadt. and that is the Nashville Predators. Now, I know we talked about them a lot as a team that could go after a bunch of different guys, but that's just because they have so much availability. They have so many different pieces that could be dealt that they could bring in, but especially considering Nashville's need as younger centers of the future. To me, Mittelstadt would be perfect, and Nashville would be able to give him the bag too. I don't think they'd have much of a problem with that, and you can put him as a second line center, you can put him as a first line center. You can do whatever you want to do, and especially considering some of the other guys we've seen float around with Nashville, especially defensively. Alexander Carrier is really the big one, who's had a great underrated year of Nashville. We've seen him on the trade block recently. I think Buffalo could go after Carrier. We could see maybe not a one-for-one swap of Mittelstadt and Carrier, but a deal like that worked upon. Really, the only problem in Carrier's case is that he's also a UFA, which is some of the reason why we've seen him brought into trade rumors. But if Buffalo maybe puts him in the deadline, has a good connection with him, and is able to re-sign him, that's the type of D that I mean could be interesting in Buffalo's system. Obviously not the biggest guy, but he's smart with the way he plays, and I think in Buffalo's system could be really, really interesting. Now, if the Sabres are going to go in a more goaltending direction with a Casey Mittelstadt trade, now, I know this might seem crazy, but it would be fascinating to see Merzlikins in a trade to Buffalo. I mean, we know that he's already requested a deal, and he's also got some security in that contract. Maybe that's something that Buffalo wants. But Merzlikins could be pretty fascinating as a maybe 1A/1B to Levi, a guy that can play some fringe minutes and wouldn't be completely relied upon maybe, but I think a change of scenery in Merzlikins' case would be the best thing for him. I don't know if Buffalo is the best place for him, but again, we're talking craziness here. Maybe that's something that fits, and also considering Columbus' center situation too. You could have Fantilli as the first line, Mittelstadt as the second line, Jenner as the third line. That's pretty solid. The only problem is that trying to find a good D on Columbus outside of Werenski is like finding a needle in a haystack. It's practically impossible, and I don't know for Buffalo if there's anybody in Columbus' system that really entices them. Maybe David Juraj, but Columbus ain't trading him right now. There were also some people suggesting Boston, which on the outside actually makes some interesting sense, even if Coyle and Zacha played pretty well, especially recently. Maybe having Mittelstadt there could bring some more flexibility into it. And probably the most likely D to be dealt if it were to happen was maybe a Matt Grzelcyk, perhaps, who had been in trade rumors in the past with Boston, and maybe we see a deal there. But again, considering they're both in the same division, I think it's just so rare to see trades like that happen, especially in Buffalo's case. I don't know if they want to make Boston any better or have any possibility of making Boston any better, but also their options are pretty limited. The name that I've also brought up a lot in the past regarding trade rumor targets is also Mario Ferraro of the San Jose Sharks. And I think if Buffalo is looking for an actual upgrade on defense, I think Ferraro could be really interesting, as a 25-year-old D also has some term in his contract at a fairly even rate. As a solid defender who can skate well, I could see him being a pretty solid fit in Buffalo's system. And I think also for San Jose, just considering their kind of flux right now, considering their contending status in the future, I think Mittelstadt could still be in a solid position when the San Jose Sharks are turning that page in the future. But also, they already have Hurdle, they already have Shore, so I'm not sure how flexible those centers want to be, but still, maybe San Jose makes a deal like that, but I'm not quite sure. But it's so hard to predict what a Casey Mittelstadt trade could look like, especially in a case where it's not just a prospect and a pick potentially going back, it's NHL players now. But I think a team, again, like Montreal, Nashville, maybe San Jose again with that Ferraro package, are maybe the most likely bets, but we'll see what ends up happening. There are so many teams out there that could use a player like Mittelstadt, and we could see just one GM. All it takes is one GM to get creative, and a deal happens, and Mittelstadt could be on a new team with a new change of scenery, just like that. But let us know in the comments down below, what do you guys think of these recent Casey Mittelstadt rumors? Where do you see him going? Is it a Montreal? Is it a Nashville? Let us know all your thoughts down below on where he could end up and what you guys think a Mittelstadt trade could look like as well. Let us know all your thoughts, and of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more updates and trade content just like this all throughout the season. Thank you guys for coming in and enjoying. If you guys also want to share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online, that would be greatly appreciated. And also click on this card for all of our trade rumor content as we lead up to the deadline. Some great stuff for you to binge up there. And I will see you in the next one. I hope you have a fantastic hockey day, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.